Hello and welcome to the first section of the lecture scheduled for June 11, 2004 in the summer 2014 session for GEO503. We're going to start this evening talking about ESRI REST services. This is a way in which we can access and query information in an ArcGIS server REST service. We'll talk about exactly what a REST service is in just a second. A REST service represents representational state transfer. That's what REST stands for, as in the slide here. REST is a way to communicate across a remote network. In this case, requests are provided by the client, the map user on a desktop or mobile device, to the ArcGIS service map service. REST is a transfer type used a lot in the JavaScript API, and we'll start looking at it now. As the graphic shows here, a client application uses the ESRI REST API to send a request to a map service. If the communication meets the required protocol, a term that you may hear me or others use is that the request is RESTful. Whenever we create an ArcGIS server map service, and we'll learn how to do that later this evening, it will automatically create what's called a REST endpoint, in which this REST endpoint is a location by which we can make various types of map queries. And when we make a RESTful communication, we'll look at some examples shortly, it's actually a URL request. The RESTful communication space is the URL of the map service that's receiving the request, and every time you create, as I mentioned, an ArcGIS server map service, a URL is created that's RESTful that you can utilize to make these requests and communications. And we attach arguments to the URL that can specify specifically the type of request we're being made and any parameters that are required on that request. Again, we'll look at several different examples very shortly. Why does ArcGIS server use REST, and why would we use REST in other types of requests? Consistency, readability, and efficiency. I think probably one of the best of these three that I think of most is the readability. REST requests are plain text requested in a format that's searchable and readable by humans. Am I searchable? I think I have this on the next slide. I don't. Since it's a URL, it can be bookmarked. So if you have a particular REST query that you want a user to repeat, you bookmark it just like you would bookmark any other URL or any other web page that you would return to. And as I mentioned, ArcGIS for server sites publish a list of available REST API services every time that the service is published, and these are called REST endpoints. You'll hear that term quite a bit from me and from others when talking about ArcGIS server. We'll use REST endpoints a lot going forward in this course, and as will you use them going forward with ArcGIS server. Here is the URL in which a list of all map and feature and other services has been exposed. You have a HTTP, the URL of the server in question. There's an extra slash here after URL. The folder ArcGIS, the folder REST, and then the folder services. So this is a standard on all ArcGIS server sites. It's a standard location where you can access these REST endpoints. Here's an example of a REST endpoint page. Notice we see home and then services. These are service folders, and we'll especially see this when we talk about publishing services. So we don't have ArcGIS server at UB, so we can't do this directly. Well, you could publish to ArcGIS Online, and we'll look at that. We can't publish ArcGIS server without the license, although the process is very similar. I should also note at this point that publishing to ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS server actually both would produce a REST endpoint that's the same, and we'll look at examples of both in a minute. Because ArcGIS server, ArcGIS Online basically is ArcGIS server, just hosted at ESRI. So on this page they have ArcGIS services broken down into folders, and you can see different services that are available at ESRI. If you've used ArcGIS Desktop, you might recognize some of these services as the base maps that you might often use in ArcGIS. So if I open up a browser window, and here's the format that I told you about. It's the URL. Check, I think that's actually services arcgisonline.com. I'll fix my typo. That's the base URL that we looked at the slide a moment ago, and then ArcGIS REST services. And just as in the screenshot, here's the web page. This is the REST endpoint for the services.arcgisonline.com REST endpoint that ESRI provides. They break out map services into specific folders. For example, the elevation folder contains a world elevation map service and a USGS elevation map service. The reference folder contains 4 different map services depicting a variety of different layers, and we'll get into shortly more what these different services mean. But you can see these are folders that are used in ArcGIS Server and ArcGIS Online to group. We can also see the version of ESRI that ESRI is hosting, 10.2. And these are specific services that are not in a folder. And as I mentioned earlier, these are many of the default services that you may have used in ArcMap when plotting base maps, like National Geographic, World Imagery, Topo, etc. And I'll come back to that. I think we already looked at this slide. If you click on one of the folders, so say here I've clicked on the demographics folder, you then get a list of all services within that folder. As you see here, ESRI has quite a few map services within the demographics folder. And as just one example shown here, USA median age is a specific ArcGIS Server map service published within that folder. So if I were to click, and I'll do this on the Chrome instance I have open in a second. If I were to pick on one of these, say USA average household size, we now have the REST endpoint of an individual map service. So that's what's depicted here is the specific REST endpoint for USA average household size, which is an ArcGIS Server map service. So we've drilled down from the server that lists the services down to an individual service. You can view the service in different formats, and we'll see that shortly. We have a service description describing the service, presents average household size in the United States. There's various capabilities that we'll talk about. Notice here now we could break this down further into layers. If I look here in the layers, we see that there's a group layer, average household size, that has specific feature layers, so depicting block groups, tracts, counties, and states. If I were just to click on demographics, just to follow the slides, click on average household size. Now this is the information about that map server. We'll talk in a minute about tiled map services. You see that here. But we could also click on the layers to get more information about a specific layer, which we'll also talk about. So now I've actually drilled down to the layer level, and we'll actually work with layers at this level a lot shortly when we get into ArcGIS Server itself, the JavaScript API. So here is the REST endpoint for the counties layer within this map survey. So yes, using ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Server, we can drill down to specific layers when needed. If I go to slide 10. If you want to explore the map service, there's a variety of different default ways in which ESRI allows us to look at the service. And they're listed in this View In link right below the service name. So for example, we can view REST services in the ArcGIS JavaScript viewer. So if I click up here to ArcGIS JavaScript, ESRI brings up a basic This is actually a JavaScript API. Look up here. This is the same API that we're learning. Built using the JavaScript API. This is a very simple implementation. But it's a way to quickly investigate a map service. And I can click on, I guess they do not have info windows that enabled in this. So basically you can only view the data using this. We can also open up the service in an ArcGIS Online map. If I click on that, we'll learn about ArcGIS Online in a bit, but this opens that service with an ArcGIS Online on map where we can change base maps, etc. and save our own maps. That's another option. We can download a KML file, which can be opened in Google Earth. This is a handy way to look at these sometimes. So if I click on Google Earth, notice at the bottom of Chrome here it created a KMZ file, which I can click, and if Google Earth is installed, and you can see I do have it installed on my computer here, the KML is loaded into Google Earth. So another way, well, that's interesting, look at the shift that it has. I've not seen that before. This may be a remnant from the Cam Studio software that I'm using to record this session. I've not seen that before. Close that. Sometimes when I'm recording, the screen is a little bit jumpy. Although when I look at the screenshot that I created a couple weeks ago, it actually shows the shift in the screenshot too. That's interesting and not something I've noticed before. Maybe something with this particular map service of ESRI's. You can also download, I won't go through this step, you can download a layer file, a .lyr file. If you've used ArcMap, you may have used layer files in the past as a way to store symbology. But you can download this LYR file, add it right into ArcMap, and then add it as an ArcMap feature class.